The poet had been giving away his own verses all morning, handing scraps of paper to strangers on the road to the guillotine. It was the 5th of April, 1794, and Philippe Fabre d'Eglantine had hours to live. It is a small, strange detail, a man giving away poems on the morning of his death. But there is a stranger detail still. The words that Fabre d'Eglantine is most remembered for were not in those poems. They were being printed that very morning on almost every official document in France. His words were on the tax rolls, on the birth certificates, on the death certificates of the people executed alongside him. The man was about to be erased. His language was not. It kept ticking, because Fabre d'Eglantine had given names to the months of a new calendar. A calendar in which the week had 10 days instead of 7. A calendar in which the day itself had 10 hours instead of 24. And so we begin with two questions that will not let go. Why would a nation build a clock that tells two different times at once? And if this revolution could behead a king and defeat the armies of half of Europe, why could it not conquer a single, ordinary Tuesday? Hold for a moment a particular object. It sits today in glass cases, one in the British Museum, others in the Musée d'Arts et Métiers in Paris. It is a pocket watch, but its face is wrong. There are two dials on it, layered together. On the inside, the hours run from 1 to 10. On the outside, they run the old way, 1 to 24. One watch, 2 times. The record shows these were not mistakes or curiosities. They were made deliberately by serious clockmakers for serious customers in the 1790s. And here's the first thing that is difficult to explain. To wear one of these watches was, in that period, understood as a mark of a good citizen, a small, visible signal that you supported the new republic and its new rational order. The record treats this as a fashion of the moment, not a law anyone enforced, but the signal was real. The watch on your wrist announced whose side you were on. And yet look again at the object. If you truly believed in the new time, if you had paid for a watch to prove it, why keep the old dial on there at all? Why carry both? The believers themselves, the very people who wanted this to work, could not quite let go of the day they had grown up inside. That is only the surface. Underneath, it is something the revolution never managed to solve. To understand what they were fighting, you have to leave the watch and look at the week. This is where the reform stopped being an idea and started touching ordinary bodies. The old week had 7 days. The new week, they called it a decade, had 10. 3 of them made a month, and every month had exactly 30 days. Clean, rational, divisible by 10. And it meant that the day of rest no longer came every 7th day. It came every 10th. Think about what that actually did to a life. Under the old week, 6 days of work stood between you and your rest. Under the new one, 9 did. A year of roughly 52 Sundays collapsed to about 36 days of rest. And the record shows laborers felt every stolen one. It is not hard to see why. Their days off had been quietly taken from them, and the taking had been dressed up as reason. The rational calendar had made people work more, and had done it so smoothly that most of them only felt it in their bones, not in any announcement. And here is the pattern erupt, the thing that should stop you. The people did not petition. They did not, for the most part, riot over the calendar itself. They did something quieter and far more damaging. They simply kept using the old dates. In private, in the countryside, in the account books of ordinary trade, weddings were still set by the old calendar. Harvests were still timed by the saints' days that had officially been abolished. Market days did not move. Sunday, which the Republic had tried to dissolve into a meaningless ordinary date, kept quietly reasserting itself. And the record is blunt about how far this went. Years into the experiment, an official report admitted that Sundays and the old Catholic holidays were still being kept with as much splendor as ever, while almost no one observed the new day of rest at all. The state had rewritten the week on paper. The week on the ground did not agree. That, too, is only the surface. What sits beneath it is the whole ambition of the project, and the single sentence of law that destroyed it. Because the calendar was never really about the calendar. It was one piece of a much larger dream, to remake all of measurement in the image of the number 10. The same movement that gave France the meter and the kilogram wanted to give it a decimal day. And so, By decree, the day was cut into 10 hours, each hour into 100 minutes, each minute into 100 seconds. It sounds tidy until you follow the arithmetic. A standard day holds 86,400 seconds. A decimal day held 100,000, which means the new second was shorter than the old one, by about 13%. Every clock in the country was, by this measure, suddenly wrong. And the strangest part is how briefly it reigned. Decimal time was decreed in 1793, but it did not become mandatory until the autumn of 1794, and it was suspended again by April of 1795. The rational clock ruled France officially for barely 6 months. 6 months to overturn the way a civilization had counted its days since antiquity. But suspended is not the same as gone. And here the story does something that still unsettles the people who study it. On the great clock of the Palais des Tuileries, the record shows that decimal time kept being displayed until at least 1801, years after the law had let it die. Picture that. A dead reform, still turning on the face of a palace clock, telling the correct decimal hour to a city that had already stopped listening. In the town of Toulouse, a decimal clock ran on the front of the Capitol for 5 years. The mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace, one of the finest minds of the age, had a decimal watch made for himself and went on using decimal fractions of the day in his own scientific work long after everyone else had quietly reverted. For a very few, it never failed at all. For everyone else, it had never really begun. Now hold the two halves of this together, because this is the heart of it. The very same law, in April of 1795, that repealed mandatory decimal time was the law that launched the metric system. The reform that would go on to conquer nearly the entire planet, meters, grams, liters, was signed into the world in the exact same breath that buried the decimal hour lying beside it. Twins, born together. One of them lived to rule the globe. The other was dead within the year. And the record gives us a reason that is almost too clean. Weights and lengths solved a problem people felt every single day. In the market, in the tax office, on the building site, where 100 local measures had made cheating easy and trust impossible. The metric system ended real arguments. The decimal hour ended no argument anyone was having. The old clock was irrational in theory and perfectly serviceable in practice. And so the reform that solved a felt problem survived, and the reform that solved an imagined one did not. That is the system underneath all of it. Measurement only lives when it settles a pain people already carry. Which brings us back, as it must, to the man on the road to the guillotine. Fabre d'Eglantine did not die for the calendar. That part matters, and the record is careful about it. He was executed on charges tied to a financial fraud and a wider conspiracy. The messy, devouring politics of the terror, not his poetry. But the timing is its own kind of testimony. The man who had named the seasons of the new age, germinal for the germinating spring, thermidor for the summer heat, Brumaire for the autumn mist, was consumed by the very revolution he had helped to decorate. And he was not alone. Charles Gilbert Rome, the mathematician who had built the calendar's actual structure, its clean 30-day months and its 10-day weeks, was condemned in the aftermath of the terror the following year. Rather than face the blade, the record shows he took his own life. The two men most responsible for the shape of Republican time were both dead within about a year of each other, killed off, one way or another, by the same upheaval that had produced their calendar. And the calendar itself outlived them, but not by much. It kept running through the rise of Napoleon, appearing on official records, on coins, on the vital registers where ordinary French lives were logged. Then, in 1805, Napoleon abolished it by decree, and the ordinary Gregorian calendar returned on the 1st of January, 1806. 12 years, and it was over. There is one last flicker. During the Paris Commune of 1871, a brief, doomed revolutionary government, someone reached back and revived the Republican calendar. It lasted about 18 days. Then it was gone again for good. So when we say France buried its own time, we should be precise, because precision is the whole point. This was never a secret. Nothing here was hidden, sealed, or covered up. It was passed in the open, printed in the open, worn on wrists and mounted on palaces in the open. and then abandoned in the open and slowly forgotten. The word buried does not mean concealed. It means left in the ground where it fell. You can walk into a museum in Paris right now and stand in front of the evidence. The two-faced watches are still there, behind glass, still telling both times at once, still refusing to choose. And that refusal is the thing that stays with you. A calendar looks like a convenience, a neutral grid, a simple tool for knowing when to plant and pay and pray. But it is nothing of the kind. It tells you when to work and when to rest, when to remember you're dead, when to celebrate, when a debt comes due. Whoever controls, it is quietly controlling the shape of an ordinary life. The revolutionaries understood this perfectly. That is precisely why they tried to change it. They believed that if they could rewrite the week, they could rewrite what people thought was natural, could make a new kind of common sense by decree. They found out that it does not work that way. You can execute a king. You can redraw the map of a continent. You can rename every month and recut every hour and mount the proof on the face of a palace. And still, a farmer will get married on a Sunday that officially no longer exists because that is the day his grandfather married. The habit outlives the law. The Tuesday wins. The poet went to the scaffold handing out verses. Somewhere in the city that same morning, a clerk was dating a document in months that Fabre d'Eglantine had named Germinal, the season of things beginning to grow. He would not live to see the spring the word described. And the calendar he helped build would not live much longer than he did. But for a few more years, on a clock high on a wall above a Paris that had already moved on, the new time kept turning, precise, rational, and completely alone.